So SynthEyes just got a very nice new addition, one that's caught me by surprise with how much I've ended up enjoying it. Live Preview is a new feature that makes it so your GeoH setup will dynamically adjust when you are messing with your trackers. So gone are the days of you having to replay your shot every time you want to see the results of whatever you just did. So aside from being fun, it's fast, it's accurate, and yeah, it cuts down your iteration time by orders of magnitude. So in this video, we'll go through a quick crash course of how to do the GeoH setup, and we will then move into an example where I do it on an eyelid. So hope you enjoy, hope you have fun, and yeah, GeoH goes live.
So Live Preview is a little toggleable checkbox found above your access locks. What does it do? It enables your geo hierarchy to give you live, real-time feedback when adjusting things like trackers, focal length, and distortion, but mainly trackers. To use this, you would typically select just one part of your hierarchy at the level where you would like anything downstream to animate live. What does that mean? If you have a human torso, and you only want the arms to move, you would check on Live Preview for the shoulder, and the joints that make up the rest of the arm would be live. But honestly, I just checked this on at the topmost root object, because you wouldn't have the attributes unlocked for your root object anyway if you don't want it to move. Quick interjection here, but I would like to point out that I am running an older build, but in your versions, when you turn on Live Preview, your hierarchy should highlight yellow to let you know that it's active and what it's affecting. The larger your hierarchies get, the more confusing it can become, so very handy. When you're ready to finalize your animation, you would just go through your hierarchy and turn off Live Preview anywhere it exists, and then play back your shot. Okay, so on to the crash course. First, let's make a head. In the 3D room, I'll come over and create a low-res head, and I'll scale it to 160 centimeters on all scale attributes. Great, and I'll zero out the position just so that we get it nice and center for the camera. Now I'm going to go over to GeoH track, and to turn this into a GeoH object, we can open up the GeoH toolbar, click GeoH create, and then shift click the mesh. This will create an object at the pivot of the mesh and parent the head underneath it. You can see in our hierarchy view over here, we have object 1, which we'll rename to head, and our head underneath it. So with the head selected, we would turn off key for what we're about to be doing in this video, because we don't want the geometry itself to do the tracking. And in GeoH, if you want anything to animate, you have to unlock the parameters first, so that trackers or the mesh can actually animate and move this thing around. So I'm going to undo those. So blue means these things are locked and they're not going to animate. So if I rotated X, the head's going to rotate on X, and a tracker or the geometry would drive that animation, so long as you've unlocked it. So GeoH is basically light rigging in SynthEyes. So what I want to do is make a joint for the jaw. So this is just going to make another object under the object, and that's going to be what you're working with. So to branch off of head, with it selected, I'm going to go GeoH through lasso, and kind of go to the side angle of this head, shift click, and now I've made a joint at the same angle as Z and Y. And it's based on where your camera is looking. So if I shift click and did a little drag out here, you can see it's aligned to that angle of the parent object. So I'll undo, and this object that we made, let's rename it jaw. And I'm going to go into edit pivots mode. And I'm going to move this over to where your jaw roughly does its actual hinging. Now, if I moved any of these parameters right now, nothing happens, because we need to actually highlight some vertices that are going to be attached to this object. So we're going to do a little weight paint. To do that, I'm going to use either these two options or paint or airbrush. I'm going to use Surface Lasso to grab some vertices here on the surface. Now, if I drag any of these parameters, we are going to move them around. Now that's a little harsh, has a pretty sharp fall off. I could use airbrush and whatever to soften it out, but I'm just going to use GeoH Soften Now. If I click it, it's quite a lot of softening, a bit too much. So I can turn range down to like 4 or 5 maybe, and hit soften now. Thankfully it's not destructive. And that looks pretty good. And that's pretty much it for the rigging portion. Now if I wanted a tracker to drive this, I would have my tracker on my subject's face, in this case their chin, and under GeoH, I would make sure that that tracker is parented under the jaw. And I would grab that tracker and make sure that the seed point is projected on the mesh. And you can see it there on the chin. And since the tracker is under the jaw, and if the jaw were unlocked on the axes that we wanted to move on, like X and Y maybe, when you play this shot forward, that tracker would actually drive the animation. Now this is a crash course, so we're just going to move on and you'll see this in action in the actual part of the video. So let's move on. So let's check out this in action on the eyelid. So I'm going to go into F3 and do a very quick setup for the eye. Going to come into GeoH track, orbit, and I'm going to open up GeoH toolbar. So as I did with our crash course, you can see that I have my object track here. And with it selected over here, head, I am going to go into GeoH through lasso and kind of go to a side angle. Let's shift click up here without highlighting any vertices, because again, holding shift and then dragging around will mean that it kind of goes to the center point of these vertices. And I'd rather paint my own and move it to where I want. So I'm going to go into edit pivot mode, move it somewhere to where the eye would sit. And hope that that's correct. Also, let's turn off occluded wireframe just to make things a little bit prettier here for the moment. So I'll jump out of edit pivots, and now I have to do a little weight painting. I am going to call this L_eyelid. And you have a few options to paint. I am going to go with Airbrush. And strength, I'm going to make it 100. And flow, I'm just going to crank that rate up to 2. And I can scroll wheel to adjust the brush size, the brush size. So if I paint, you can see the vertices change color. If you go into your solid shading mode, we can see it a little bit better. And now, just to fit this into position, I'm going to do some little posing here. So I'll drag this down and I'll look at the job that I did. And it's a little bit crude. So with Airbrush, here's what I can do. I can hold Control to subtract some of that paintwork that I did. And then left click to add in some influence back if I need. So I'll get rid of that. I'll reduce on that a little bit, maybe add some over here. Kind of even out these faces. And I can turn the strength or the flow down. I just want to interject here and say for some reason I am not using the GeoH blur weights. I seem to have forgotten it exists. But you have the blur weights. Instead of adding and subtracting everything, yeah, you can just go and smooth everything out. So yeah. Maybe I want to close the lid a little bit more just to see what's going on. Let's put it down to its max for some of these vertices and then we can subtract. Actually, that's a bit too low. It got obscured a little bit. Great. And if you notice that your eyelid is overhanging a little bit too much, you can actually move the pivot of your object right now. So I could go back into edit pivots mode and I can reposition this if I need to. In this case, I think up and down would push the lid forward and back if you wanted them to meet perfectly. Great. So let's add a little bit of influence right here just to close this up. So I think this looks awesome. Maybe not the most anatomically correct thing, but what can you do? So I'll zero this out. And let's attach a tracker. So coming over here, let's go and place a tracker here on the eyelash. And we'll go back to GeoH, and we'll make sure that that tracker is dragged and placed under our left eyelid object. And immediately, here's some things that we're going to want to do. We're going to turn off this key up here because that's image-based tracking for the mesh itself, because your mesh can track. We're going to turn it off because we want this driven by the trackers that we provide. Now we're going to pick which axes we want to actually animate. Do we want this? No. This? No. Rotation like this, X? Yes. So we'll unlock it so it actually is going to be driven by the tracker. Rotation over here. Your eyelid doesn't really do this, but because we're Matchmove artists, we don't always have the most perfect geometry, perfect world space and stuff. The world's not perfect for us. So I'm going to free up this channel a little bit just so that the tracker can nudge it around slightly. And does your eyelid do this? I hope not. You'd be rather unique if it did that. Go to a doctor. So now that we have that, select your tracker, and back in the camera view, you want to make sure that it's dropped onto mesh, so your seed point is actually being used by the hierarchy object. So now, here's where we're at. We have our eyelid object in the hierarchy with a tracker under it, and we placed the coordinate. We placed the seed point. We've also unlocked the channels that we want to actually animate, and we turned off the keyframes so the mesh itself is not trying to do the tracking for us. Now there is one more thing. Live preview itself. We're going to turn that on. Actually, sorry, these channels. Notice if I go back, they're locked again. Maybe I'm going to go to my first frame, and I'm going to Control right click just to clear any keyframes across the range. I promise something happened. So I'm going to now turn them off in the first frame, scrub ahead, and you can see that we are good. Ignore the fact that this is broken, it'll be fixed. So now that we did that, we're going to turn on live preview for our eyelid. Now you can do this up higher in the hierarchy and it'll ripple downwards, but for now we're just doing the eyelid. So with that selected, live preview on, and you can see it already snapped into place because it is working. Let's switch our layout to camera in perspective. Grab our tracker and see what frame it's on. Wow, it's over here. And let's see what happens if I drag it around. Look at that. So now we have a fairly nice representation of what we might see in other software if we want to take this down the pipeline. Now for me, this has been quite good so far in a number of scenarios that I've actually just been using some of the geometry out of SynthEyes now for some shots. So we'll go and place this tracker up, and we can start to do some tracking. Now I am going to very quickly blast through this. And for portions of the shot where you can see where we're going to have a more dramatic shift in motion on this eyelid, we will be able to look at the mesh updating live and see if it's actually fitting how we'd hoped. And look at what we have here. Before we had this, we would have to track our shot, and then we would have to go back to GeoH, play it from the keyframe forward and back, and it would take a bit of time for you to actually see if your result is working as you'd hoped. So I do believe this would save you a fair amount of time. It's kind of like if I'm working in other software, where I'm dealing with an actual rig and I'm putting deformers on it and I'm moving stuff around and watching the mesh actually do the motions with me. Now we've got a little bit of that in SynthEyes. Okay, so I have this final version that I would now like to ship off to other software. We have all of these joints animating independently, driven by trackers, and there is one more step to do. you're going to want to turn off live preview anywhere it exists, and then play back through your shot so that the animation actually is realized. So we'll go to GeoH, and we'll go down and just turn it off anywhere. I have it on in a few objects, but if you had it on in your top node, you might only have to do this once. But my head is not set to GeoH, it is a solved object. And I could have set it to GeoH. But I didn't because I'm a loser. So with all of these being off, I will go back to the start of my shot. And we'll just run through it. And that would be it. Also, excuse my crude painting. This is a later file and I didn't realize that I accidentally painted something very poorly. So pretend that you don't see this. For the record, here's the better version. I couldn't just leave it like that. I hope you enjoyed this video. This new feature has been a lot of fun to explore, and there are tons of ways to make use of this, because GeoH is a very powerful tool and it's just been made a lot faster with live preview. Take care, happy tracking.